This is the motto of the show Hour of the Truth. Rome never changes. They used to call us heretics and send the Inquisition to kill us. Today they call us terrorists and send on their crusades. Times and methods may have changed, the goal still stays the same. Extirpate the remnant of the true word of God, Bible-believing people who uphold the truths in Jesus Christ's name.
From 1203 to 1805, 50 million Christians died, suffering at the hands of Rome, 'cause they believed in Christ alone. They died through Europe, especially Spain, for they saw all but Christ is vain. He suffered by his death for men, to save them from their awful sin. 600 years of martyred saints that history cannot erase. With iron heel and iron hand, the Roman popes rule the land. Those ignorant of history may be swept into apostasy. We won't be loved by Rome's sweet lie, with 50 million reasons why. Salvation is by faith alone, in Christ alone, by grace alone. A sovereign God give faith to man. Salvation's in the Maker's hand. This gospel offends Rome today. They offer up another way, a counterfeit, a compromise. Beware the ancient papal lie, with such a cloud of witnesses who by grace died in their Lord. Recall their memory to say, by the same faith we live today.
Hello and welcome everybody to a new video from Jörg, Joggler66, Hour of the Truth, on the channel War on Disinformation. For the next, and this is the 36th reading of the book History of the Inquisition by Philip von Limborch, a book whose reading I have, or which reading I have a little bit postponed the last months. I haven't been very busy, where in the beginning I made a recording almost every day, and now it's already been months, I mean a few weeks since the last one, but before that months, because today is the 26th of June 2018, where I come to the table to do the next reading of this book. And with all the things I've studied in the meantime, I have to say that, whenever I was reading in this book, The History of the Inquisition by Philip von Limborch, and I was explaining all the heretics, meaning all the people who are heretics in the understanding of the Roman Catholic Church's opinion of who a heretic is, not the biblical, I tried always to justify that those heretics were always true Bible-believing Christians, which is not true. We know that through the Manichaeans, we know that through the Arians, we know that through Cathars and all these kinds of people who were not Bible-believing Christian, but who were opposed to the supremacy of the Roman Catholic Church, and were heretics in the eyes of the Roman Catholic Church, because they did not adhere to the ultramontane authority of the Pope. And in that way I want to change my reading a little bit in that regard, that even though these people, or often these people, are not true Bible-believing Christians, they still are enemies of the Roman Catholic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church persecuted them. The Roman Catholic Church persecuted probably much more than the 50 million people that you always hear in the Inquisition song in the beginning, throughout the ages. And not all of these 50 million people were true Bible-believing, Jesus Christ-following Christians. I'm quite sure of that. Nevertheless, the Roman Catholic Church has absolutely no authority to persecute anyone because of their belief. Jesus Christ did not persecute anyone because of their belief. And Jesus Christ did not ordain an inquisition to quote-unquote convert or die to his belief. He left the people their choice. And they have a clear choice, as we have today, and whether we adhere to Christ and we follow Christ and we are saved or we are not. That's up to us. That's our choice. God can only tick us on the shoulders and give us the possibility to make that choice, because there's no free will. That's a heresy. That's a heretic belief coming from Calvin. But the point is that we have this choice, whether to listen to God or not. And a lot of these heretics listened to God in their way, not in the real, true way, but they still were convinced of their righteous belief. And because they were convinced of that, they went even singing and smiling and happy, more or less, to the stakes where they were burned. They were tortured in the dungeons of the Inquisition, which is probably something that we come later to, because we started now with the introduction of the Inquisition in the 13th century. So from here we go to these things. But people were so convinced of that their thought was right that they didn't mind dying for it. A little bit like a lot of the Buddhist priests or monks who self-immolated themselves in the Vietnam War. You remember when they put themselves on fire? They died for their belief. That was not the belief of Jesus Christ, but it was a belief that gave them that strength to do that. And therefore I just want to say that I have respect for all the people that have been persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church. The most respect, of course, I have of true Bible-believing Christians. And we know that the people of the Albigenses and the Waldenses, who we're going to speak about a little bit more during this book reading, of course were true Bible-believing, even Sabbath-keeping Christians. But even other people, like the Manichaeans, like the Cathars, and others that we spoken of and that we will speak of, I still have respect for them, certainly because they did not bow to the authority of Rome. And therefore Rome considered them heretics. And whoever Rome considers a heretic and an enemy of himself is an enemy of the devil. And therefore not always are saved people, but people who stand in their conscience right before God. I think this is the main important thing that we should take from this. So I will not make that much a distinction anymore, speaking about these different people who have been persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church, and I say, oh yeah, okay, but they were not Roman, they were not Bible-believing Christians. They were also, in the biblical sense, heretics. That doesn't matter. That doesn't give the Roman Catholic Church any right to persecute them. And today we are going to continue in the book, and that's why I'm starting here. Just put this a little bit so that we can see this. We are starting on page 81 in the book, which is 249 in the PDF, and see if we can get a little bit through this chapter 14, which is called Concerning the First Hindrances to the Progress of the Inquisition. Since last time we read about that the Inquisition was introduced into Aragon in France. It was also introduced in Toulouse and Italy, and now we see the first hindrances to the progress of the Inquisition. Okay? Therefore we're going to continue the reading right now. Although the Pope perpetually pressed the Inquisition, yet it was with great difficulty admitted. The novelty of the tribunal, by which the laity were excluded wholly from all judgment against heretics, greatly offended men. They were indeed willing to leave to the ecclesiastics the affair of doctrine to judge what was orthodox and what was heretical. And with orthodox we have to read Catholic, that's why I took this little note here. But they contended that the judgment of their persons belonged to them, meaning to determine whether any person professed any opinion condemned by the common judgment of the clergy and so became an heretic, and especially they believed that it belonged to their tribunal to pronounce sentence against the guilty, whereas they now found themselves wholly excluded from all share in it by this new tribunal, which the Pope was endeavoring everywhere to erect. All the power left to the secular magistrate was only to put to death those who were condemned for heretics by the ecclesiastics, whereby he became a mere slave to the inquisitors, as being obliged to execute their sentence with a blind obedience. Blind obedience, without any cognizance of the crime. Blind obedience, that is like with the Jesuits, perende ac cadaver, blind or even dead body obedience, without any cognizance of the crime, meaning any knowledge of the crime. This was the case even of some who otherwise were zealous defenders of the papal authority. Amongst others, Louis, King of France, made a law by which he commanded that his subjects, when cited before the ecclesiastical tribunals, should not appear to plead their cause, and that if they were censured for contumacy, the goods of those who had passed the censure should be seized by the civil magistrates till it was recalled. The Pope thought this law unjust, because it is against his law, and the Pope thinks that every law is unjust that goes against his Roman Catholic canon law, and injurious even, according to the Pope's opinion, to the prelatical authority. And therefore, that their power might not be wholly suppressed by this law, he sent letters to the king, in which he set before him the examples of Charles the Great, Theodosius, and Valentine the emperors, who had greatly enlarged the power of the bishops, and yet had not obscured the glory of their own majesty, but rather increased it, and admonished him to repeal those laws, which were contrary to the ecclesiastical liberty. He then put him in mind of the sentence pronounced by Honorius, by which the makers of such laws exposed themselves to anathemas, unless they repealed them within 2 months. The king, who was soliciting the title of the obedient son of the church, yielded to the papal severity, and was entreated by Antichrist Pope Gregory that he would finish the work of cutting off all the remains of heresy in the province of Toulouse, and compel Earl Raymond to perform his promise. About Earl Raymond we spoke already in the last chapter, right? Remember that. So this Earl Raymond had bound himself by an oath to extirpate heresy, and to lead an army into the Holy Land when he was at Paris, and had made peace with the French king and the church. But as there happened a tumult at Toulouse against the censors of the faith, raised by those who were said to be infected with heresy, and as there was not an immediate stop put to it upon its first beginning, the Earl seemed to have broke his promise, and to cherish heretics, because he did not restrain their fury. Upon this the Antichrist severely rebuked him, and, amongst other things, says, quote, that he had often hindered the Inquisition against heretics by commanding to be observed in their favor certain forms injurious to the statutes of the Pope himself, and contrary to the laws relating to the Inquisition of heretics, that he had suffered many persons condemned as heretics to dwell publicly in his country, that he had given protection to others who from the other places had fled to him, that his counselors and servants were suspected and defamed of heresy, etc., so that he had not been afraid to declare himself a favorer, receiver, and defender of heretics, and their abettors, and that those he had been admonished on these accounts he had not been carefully to amend. He had not been careful to amend. I'm going to change the picture here. I was looking for some pictures of the Inquisition in Toulouse, the Dominican Inquisition of Toulouse, and this is what Google picture search came up with. A lot of pictures that we see here on the Inquisition, and I'm just going to leave these pictures here to the left of the screen and leave them on here while we continue reading in the book. Now, the Pope gave fresh instructions to his legate on this affair and ordered him to renew the Toulouse statutes, to reject all the edicts and laws which infringed on the ecclesiastical liberty, to remove from the public councils all suspected or defamed of heresy. And by other letters he was ordered to cause all the houses of the Toulouse heretics to be demolished. He also earnestly entreated the French king that he would use the power committed to him by God to compel the Earl and councils of Toulouse to amend the aforesaid crimes and do his utmost to extirpate heresy. Then he admonished him to force the Earl to go to Jerusalem the next March and send his own brother Alphonsus, to whom Raymond's daughter had been betrothed, to administer the affairs of the earldom of Toulouse. But the tribunal of the Inquisition was not only hateful to the people by reason of its novelty, but because the inquisitors themselves rendered it hateful by their excessive cruelty. Amongst these, one Friar Robert, and I was looking up that on the internet and searching pictures, but I couldn't find him. Amongst these, one Friar Robert was not the least. He was surnamed Bulgarus, because he had cruelly persecuted and delivered over to the fire the Valdenses, then called Bulgarians, or, according to others, because he himself had been a Bulgarian or Valdensian, and upon his forsaking them had entered into the order of the Dominicans. You see, this is why I was looking for the Dominican Inquisition pictures that we see on the left here. And it's quite interesting that we see that he probably was a Valdense himself, and that they called the Valdenses here Bulgarians, from Bulgaria. Where does that come from? That's an interesting new twist on history that I don't even knew and that I don't even understand yet. But we have to understand, of course, that true Bible-believing Christians and heretics of those, but heretics of Rome too, went through Eastern Europe too. From Italy they spread into all directions, north, but also east and west. And east is in direction of Bulgaria. And we know that the Valdenses went out from the valleys in Piedmont to all of Europe, into all kinds of places, even to Germany, and also probably to Czechia and Slovakia and Hungary, and as we see, Bulgaria. Interesting here that the Valdenses were called Bulgarians, yeah? And that he probably defected from the true faith of the Valdenses, and then after he forsake them he went into the order of the Dominicans, and it is just the Dominican order that was responsible for the Inquisition. That's why I have the pictures here. Anyway, continue. He was Inquisitor of the Faith in the Netherlands and France, a man of an austere temper, supported by the royal authority of King Louis, who commanded him to burn many who were infected with heresy. But when afterwards the said friar, according to Matt Paris, under the year 1236, abused the authority given him, then transgressed the bounds of modesty and justice, growing haughty, powerful, and terrible, condemning to the same punishments the innocent as well as the guilty, he was put out of his office by the Pope's order, and shut up in perpetual imprisonment. Afterwards Falco exercised the same severity in Languedoc, upon account of whose effective cruelty Philip the Friar sent in the year 1301 certain persons to inquire into his mismanagement, and ordered that for the future those who were suspected of heresy should be put in the royal prisons at Toulouse, and that the king's subjects should not be detained by the inquisitor's decree without the bishop's advice first, and the assistance of the royal seneschal. Yeah, it's interesting. I have problems pronouncing that word. So it is pronounced like this.
Seneschal. Seneschal.
So, of the royal seneschal. And if you don't know what that is, because I had to look it up, it is a governor or other administrative or judicial officer. Okay? But let's go back to some other pictures. This is a picture of the book we are reading. That's also very fitting here. It would have been well if these two persons only had exceeded the bounds of just judgment. But in reality, this was the fault of most of them. And therefore, that the minds of men might not be too much exasperated, they added some of the order of the friars minors to the predicants, and their gentleness to temper the other rigor. This was actually done in the year 1328. And indeed, this tribunal of the Inquisition was the fittest method in the world for persons to oppress their enemies, under the pretense that they were infected with heresy, and was abused to this purpose by political men as well as ecclesiastics. If it be true that Reynold writes of the Emperor Frederick, that he was greedy of revenge, and used by various pretenses and subordination of crimes to rage against those whom he inwardly hated. To this purpose he pretended great zeal to cut off heretics, and appointed that in all the provinces and places of note there should be a judge, together with the prelate, to take cognizance of the examination of persons by torture. And for this pious precaution, torture is explained as a pious precaution, as it appeared he was commanded by Antichrist Pope Gregory. But he improved this to gratify his revenge, causing many innocent Catholics who had endured his displeasure to be accused of heresy and burned alive, to the great grief and offense of all, insomuch that Gregory gravely admonished him that he should endeavor to extirpate heretics and not destroy Catholics. However, the Roman pontiffs did much more insolently abuse their power. For they were not afraid to brand with the name of heresy, and to proceed against heretics, kings and princes, and even the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire himself, if they would not own their unbounded power and do everything according to their beck. This is one of the prime examples where I would have made earlier the comment, so what, they were all heretics in the biblical sense. It's just when you rebel against the Pope, you are a heretic, and when you are rebelling against the Pope, well, that's okay with me, I have to say. Even though that they are probably also Catholics, but whenever they rebel against the Antichrist, they have my sympathy. Let's call it this way. For they were not afraid to brand with the name of heresy and to proceed against the heretics, even kings and princes and the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire himself, if they would not own their unbounded power and do everything according to their beck. Reminds me a little bit of the Way to Canossa of the German Emperor Henry IV, wasn't it? In the year 1000 something. Of this we have a famous instance of the Emperor Frederick. He had made very severe laws against heretics, greatly increased the authority of the Inquisition, and in the year 1236, having found some persons at Palens infected with heresy, he ordered eternal marks of infamy to be imprinted on their faces with a red-hot iron. And yet he could not escape the pontiff's thunder. For in the year 1239 Antichrist Pope Gregory pronounced the sentence of excommunication against him, and absolved all his subjects from the obligation of any duty or oath they were under to him. Frederick gave an abundant answer, and purged himself of the crimes objected to him in his sentence, in which there was no mention of heresy. But the Antichrist sent letters to all the prelates and to the Christian kings and princes, in which he charged him with various heresies, and, amidst others, with this, quote, that he constantly affirmed that he could not be excommunicated by him as the Vicar of Christ, thus affirming that the power of binding and loosing was not in the Church delivered by our Lord to Peter and his successors. Whilst he thus asserts heresy, his own argument concludes against himself, showing by consequence that he hath wrong sentiments concerning the other articles of the Orthodox, Roman Catholic, we understand this faith, and he endeavors to take away that privilege of power granted by the Word of God to the Church, upon which the faith is founded. Yeah, the discussion about the keys given to Peter and his quote-unquote successor, the Pope, to bind and to loose, we spoke about that abundantly when we discussed the book from Martin Luther against the Roman papacy and institution by the devil, as you probably remember me reading this on my first YouTube channel. Let me just see if I can make this here still a little bit bigger. 175%. That is a little bit easier for me to read and probably for you to follow. Yeah, this just works. 175%. It's a little bit easier, right? And especially better than the small when I had the full screen with 2 pages on. Okay. Neither did the Pope rest till he had put in execution the sentence he had pronounced against the Emperor Frederick. For in the year 1245, Antichrist Innocent calls a council in France, and therein condemns and excommunicates him, speaking of the Emperor, deprives him of his empire, and absolves his subjects from their oath of fidelity, and by his apostolic authority firmly and strictly forbids all persons to obey him any more as emperor or king, and decrees that whosoever should from henceforth yield him counsel or aid or favor as emperor or king should be ipso facto excommunicated, and that the electors of the empire might freely proceed to the choice of another emperor to succeed him in his place. So actually he excommunicated the emperor and gave him free for everyone to kill him if they would ever again accept his authority as emperor. Now Antichrist Innocent IV procured Henry Landgrave of Thuringia to be created king of the Romans, that by his assistance he might drive Frederick from the empire. Frederick, to purge himself of the crime of heresy, sent letters to several Christian princes, in which he defended himself against the charge. He also commanded the Archbishop of Palermo, the bishops of Pavia, Monte Cassino, and Cava, the abbots of Casanova, Roland, and Nicholas, a predicant, diligently to inquire and examine him concerning his sentiments to the system of Christian, speaking Catholic faith, and other articles and mysteries of religion. This being done, and an instrument drawn up, he appointed them his procurators, that they should make oath before the Roman Pontiff, the Antichrist, that Frederick, having been examined, rightly agreed with all Christians in every article of faith, meaning Catholics, agreed with all Catholics in every article of faith, and was at the farthest distance from heresy. They had a very unwelcome reception, as being the procurators of a man expelled the company of the faithful, and for this wickedness were set to deserve punishment rather than audience. But when they affirmed themselves to be the messengers of a pure Catholic man, I hate to use the word Christian as the author writes here, the affair was ordered to be examined by 3 cardinals of the Roman Church, who pronounced that purgation trifling and void, inasmuch as they had no authority to take his examination. On this he commanded Frederick that if he would regularly purge himself and submit to a right examination, he should repair to the apostolic see without the noise and terror of arms attended only by a small retinue, and proper security should be given that no injury and disturbance should be offered to him or his. After the imperial power was thus insulted, no one will wonder that the like process should be carried on against Iselin, Lord of Padua, and zealously attached to the emperor's party. For in the year 1248 the same Pope Innocent, as we learn from his letters to the prelates of the Milanese and Marquisate of Treviso and Emilia, pronounced the ecclesiastical censures against him on the day of the festival of the Holy Sacrament. This must be the 25th of December, right? Festival Day of the Holy Sacrament. Now let's see, do we have a... oh no, that's containing the duchies of Parma, Modena, Mirandola and part of Mantua, is what we read here in the footnote, that we understand what Emilia is. Emilia is a region which is also very famous for its wine in Italy today. He had appointed inquisitors of the faith against him before, because he had been aspersed with the report of heresy. In order to refute the charge, he sent messengers to Rome, who bound themselves by a solemn oath, in the name of Caesar, to declare that his sentiments were right concerning the Catholic faith. But as that purgation was not allowed of by the Bishop of Sabine, who was appointed to take the report of the messengers, nor by the Antichrist Pope himself, because, as he pretended, the importance of the affair required the guilty person to be present, he fixed him in calends of August for the day in which he was to clear himself, and according to the papal manner provided for his security, hereby demonstrating that he must entertain no hopes of reconciliation unless he would in all things subject himself to the beck and pleasure of the Pope, and own him as supreme judge in all causes whatsoever. But as Iselin did not appear, the Antichrist in the year 1251 deputed the Bishop of Treviso and the prior of the Predicants at Mantua to let him know that he should be subject to all the punishments ordained against heretics, unless he appeared before the Holy See within the next calends of August and submitted himself to receive his commands. That if he refused to appear, they should publicly declare that he was to be avoided by all as one defiled with heresy or leprosy, that his body might be seized on, his goods plundered, and that an army of cross-bearers should be sent against him and his followers. This process lasted some time before the Pope pronounced the long-intended sentence. At length, in the year 1254, on the day of the festival of the Sacrament, Iselin was condemned for heresy and subjected by the Pope's sentence to all the punishments of heretics. Antichrist Pope Innocent published a most bitter sentence against him, in which he charged him with the most horrid crimes. He commanded also all the prelates that they should publish the condemnation of Iselin for heresy, and punish all who adhered to him with the punishments ordained against the followers of heretics. But there are extant also the Pope's letters upon the same subject to Alberic, his brother, by which he gave him all his brother's effects, whom he had condemned to the punishments of heretics, and confirmed the sentence of William, king of the Romans, by which he condemned him for rebellion, and deprived him of all his lands that were subject to the empire. Oh, okay, I have to switch always a little bit with the page here before reading, but that's alright, right? I can live with that. Raymond, also Earl of Toulouse, we read already about him in the previous chapter, quite oppressed with the several misfortunes we have before related, submitted his neck to the papal yoke. For he signified to the Antichrist that he desired that heretical pravity might be quite destroyed and wholly extirpated out of his dominions. The Pope highly extolled him for so pious a zeal, and to oblige him, as he says, commanded the Bishop of Agen in France to make inquisition after and punish the heretics of Toulouse. William de Podo Laurenti, as Reynold cites him, relates that Raymond ordered about 80 persons who either confessed or were convicted of heresy and judgment before him to be burned with fire in the city of Agen, in the place called Berleja. But he did not long survive it, dying in the year 1249, and was the last Earl of Toulouse of that line. After his death, the earldom went to his son-in-law, the Earl of Poitiers, and he dying without issue, it devolved to the kings of France. The office of the Inquisition was more than 10 years before this brought into Lombardy. Antichrist Innocent IV, in 1247, willing to establish it, commanded Friar John Vicentinus, a predicant, that he should constantly oppose the heretics in Lombardy, and gave him power to absolve those who would abjure their heresy and return to the Church, and of granting indulgences to such who would attend upon his sermons, and forbid that any of the superiors of the same order, the provincial or master general, should hinder him in the office of the Inquisition, or remove him from it. From the neighboring province of Toulouse, the purer doctrine had spread itself into the province of Narbonne and Aragon. Wherefore Antichrist Innocent IV, in a letter sent to Raymond Peñafortius, master of the predicants, and to the provincial of Spain, commands that they should depute by the Pope's own authority some of the friars of his order in the kingdom of Aragon to be inquisitors of heretical pravity, and in the province of Narbonne, that in that district only that was subject to James, king of Aragon, and enjoined them that they should effectually proceed against heretics, their abbesses, and so on, fearing no one in this affair but God, according to the form published by Antichrist Gregory and renewed by himself. But Luke Wedding relates, so that must be another historian author. Luke Wedding relates that in the year 1232 inquisitors were appointed in Aragon by the command of Antichrist Gregory IX, the king desiring them of the Pope that the instigation of Raymond Peñafortius, his confessor. Okay, I'm gonna read that sentence again to make sense. But Luke Wedding relates that in the year 1232 inquisitors were appointed in Aragon by the command of Antichrist Pope Gregory IX, the king desiring them of the Pope that the instigation of Raymond Peñafortius, his confessor. Not long after a synod was held at Tarragone, which made many decrees against heretics, and an inquisition was there set up, after the manner of that of Toulouse, which was carried on with the greatest rigor against the heretics which arose at that time, and which lasted more than a whole age. For in the life of Nicholas Aymeric, a predicant monk, and author of the Directory of the Inquisitors, 'tis related that Aymeric flourished in the times of Antichrist Urban V and Antichrist Gregory IX, popes, and of Peter IV, King of Aragon. That he was created Inquisitor General about the year of our Lord 1358 and succeeded Nicholas Russell Anno Domini 1356 and made a cardinal. That he died the 4th of January in 1393, having strenuously kept up the office of the Inquisition against heretics 44 years successively. Upon his death, and then face this, upon his death, the Inquisition remained in force in that kingdom, but gradually sunk of itself upon the entire extinction of the Waldenses. About this time also the Inquisition was introduced into Burgundy. For about the year 1223 the friar predicants of the Order of Dominic were received in Besançon. For whereas some of the Waldenses had retired into the country of Burgundy, John Earl of Burgundy, at the instigation of the Dominicans, obtained a bull from Antichrist Pope Innocent IV, beginning Zelo Magno Zelantis, dated in 1247, in the 12th day of September, by which the Inquisition was erected in the territories of Besançon. The same Pope had in the preceding year, by a bull dated 12th of December 1248, that is, beginning Ille Humani Generis and Co., admonishing the prior and convent of the friars predicants at Besançon that they should appoint inquisitors in that country, and after an exhortation to the whole order should make inquisition against heretics. But this tribunal by decrees came also to nothing, because when the Waldenses were extinguished, there were no others for the Inquisition to proceed against. But in these last ages it was restored again. When the Waldenses were extinguished, there were no others for the Inquisition to proceed against. Yeah, I think it took them that much time that when they were done with extinguishing the Waldenses, the Reformation was coming up in this world. And there they had a new enemy to take care of. So, this video has been about 40 minutes for this reading of this chapter, and I appreciated that the author puts quite short chapters here for the moment, and that we can keep the reading between a half and 1 hour. I know the book will take many more parts to be concluded, but still I'm going on with this book, and still I'm going on to finish this book, even though I don't know exactly when, because in the meantime I have taken on myself many other projects in German and in English, especially on my first channel, but also on this second channel. But I still hope that you keep up with me, and that you will follow and keep following this reading of the Inquisitional book, History of the Inquisition by Philip von Limborch, which is a wonderful history and gives us really the grounds on how the Inquisition developed, and we are going to see how it will develop further in the midst of the 13th century when we continue next time in our reading of the book. For today, I thank you for watching and listening, and of course, whenever you have a comment, for commenting, and until next time, Maranatha.